We're going to start with our square, and we're all familiar now with the direction of our shadow, and we're going to outline our shadow with a 3, your 3. So I'm going to go in the direction I'm supposed to go. I like the thick tip, but if you like the thin tip, you can use the thin tip. I just like but then see, my nib is a little different than yours. I can kind of just use the very end. So if you want to use your thin end, you can use your thin end. So why I wanted to start with that shadow is to remind you that we don't outline our shadows with black. We did when we crosshatched, but we don't here. The type of rendering that we're going to be doing is a blended technique. So we want to leave everything a little light. Now, on my last shadow for my sphere, I had a circle here, and then I had a circle out there, so I'm going to put that on. Now, our shadow's much darker, but we're using the 3 to outline it. And then our cone, we're going to put our cone on, our cone shadow. It's going to disappear behind our cylinder. Don't forget to round out your shadow on your cylinder. Then there's always shadow underneath everything. We have to decide now whether we want to start on our shadow side or our light side. So let's start with the most obvious thing to see, and that's our shadow side. And for our shadow, we need our 5 and 7. So we'll start with a 5 and a 7 on our cube. There's light bouncing off the surface that the object is sitting on. So that means that this bottom part of our shadow side is going to look a little lighter than the part that's furthest away. It will also make more contrast here, the part of the box that's closer to us. So you wet the paper with your lightest marker, my 50. I'm going to start there with my 50. So you see, you're making it a little darker. Now, if you have a really strong contrast there and you don't like it, you go back with the 50 and re-wet it. And that will take away some of the value contrast. So your goal is to have a little more contrast up near the top and not quite so much at the bottom. Now you do the same thing for the cast shadow. The cast shadow is the absence of light. This is our 50, where the light is completely blocked by the object. So now I need some contrast between the object itself and its shadows. And if I don't like that shape that I made, I smooth it out with my 50. So I've got 70 at the front, and you see you've got dark to light and dark to light. The 7 is up here, and the 5 is down here, and 7 is here, and 5 is there. Now we're going to use the 3 and the 5. Okay, so we're working on our halftone. Same thing applies. There's light all down here, and it's bouncing up into our box. We want to leave a key line, a white line there for the plane change, because light gathers at edges. So we need to leave a little bit of a key line. So I'm going to wet the paper with my 3. I'm going to start up here and wet the paper with my 3. And I'm going to try to maintain that white edge. I can go back and paint it in later, but you see, if you move your hand back and forth, you don't see your strokes. And in this type of rendering, that's what we're doing. So if you stop, or if you only make one stroke, that's not going to happen. You're going to just see a blob. So you have to keep your hand moving. Now, I don't like that shape, so I'm going to blend it back with the 3. Okay, so we started with the 3, then we added the 5. And I can go back and tickle. As long as it's still wet, I can go back and tickle it a bit. But you don't want it so wet that you're getting stains. I had a little bit of a stain there. Then you go back and see. is this side darker than this side, or did it get a little bit away from me? So I'm just going to go and maybe put a little bit more of my 7 in here just to take that back a bit. And maybe a little bit of the 5 too. There, that will knock that back. Now we can put away the 5. It's a good idea while you're working to keep your markers open. Otherwise, you have to uncap them and it takes up time while things are drying in front of you. Now the markers do dry a little lighter. As they dry, they get a little lighter. So now this time I'm using the 1, and I'm going to try again to leave that key line. So I'm starting at the front with the 1, and I'm moving back. I want to leave some of the white of the paper though, so I have to find a nice shape. So I'm just going to try and do that. I'm just going to swing a little bit across and then go up. Just kind of swing and go up. And I need a little bit of the 3. Make sure you're using the 3 just to put a little accent at the part that's closer to me while it's still wet. So just right here at the front. Okay, so that's our cube, and then what to do is to now firm up your outline. So I made a mistake here with my outline, so I'm going to correct it. And I don't emphasize the inside lines, I emphasize the outside lines. And if you want to, you can use a white pencil or your gel pen to clean up some of the inside. You could use your ruler and clean it up. That's what's lovely about these pens, is that you can get a nice crisp line. They too you have to move your hand back and forth for them as well. So we'll begin our shadow with the 5 and then add the 7 for accent. So, and remember that you move your hand back and forth and back and forth. If you just stroke it on once, it's not going to cover the page the way that we need it to. And this is the time to improve your shape as well. If you had an unfortunate shape to begin with, you can fix it up a little bit now. And we'll put a little bit of 7 just underneath. And you can put a little bit of a design technique in front of these two just to jazz them up a bit and disguise some of the more unfortunate occurrences. Okay, we put the 7 away now and open up everything else because we're going to start with the 10 and then introduce the 30 and then the 50. The longer you stay on the paper, the darker the marker appears as well. So those 3 things are happening. So you should have 3 open markers in your hand and be ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 1 down here because I know that it's dark down here. So I'm safe. I know that nothing too bad can happen. This is shadow. So now I swing around because I need a little halftone up there. And I try to take care of that shape, making it look as egg-shaped as I can get it. And try not to be pressing. There isn't a need to press. Just use a light hand. The markers respond to the weight of your hand. So now I'm going all the way to the end. Now if you like a design style, you can zoom in like that. You can have a little swirl in. That would be okay. And that's our lightest value in the light. Now I'm re-wetting it so that I can add my 30%. And I add it inside the form. Now my paper is very wet, so I'm not seeing much of a difference, but that's what we want so that we don't get a harsh line. I can take the 3 all the way to the edge because 3 is still in the light, remember, 3 is still part of the light. But the 5, I can't take it that far. So when I introduce the 5, I've got to keep it inside the 3. That's key whenever you're doing any shape. Keep the 5 inside the 3. Don't let it be on the paper all by itself. And I'm not going to take the 5 all the way to the edge. I'm just going to keep it inside. I might use the 3 just to blend it to the edge though, so that it's getting a little bit darker near the bottom than the top. And then if you really feel that you'd like to have more contrast, you can put some 7 in the middle of the 5 and just let the paper and the markers do the work. Let it dry. So don't fuss after you get that much on, just leave it alone. And you can see your paper is probably shiny from all the marker. Anything that we render after this will not be as difficult as challenging as this is. These shapes are never usually on their own. There's boxes stacked on boxes, things sticking out of the ellipses, cones and cylinders and so on, like a lamp or something. So these are the most challenging to get just right. This one has the challenge of tapering as well. So you've got to go wide at the bottom and thin at the top. So I'm using the 1 now, just wide at the bottom and thin at the top, tapering to the top. And I've got it nice and wet now, so I can add some 30. And check your marker every time you use it. You try to keep them in order when you have them in your hand, but sometimes that gets tricky. So there we go. I'm going to try to let that stand for that side. Now, on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come from the light. It might have been wiser to come from the shadow out into the light, but I want to use the number 1 to wet the paper. And remember, you don't need to press. You just glide the marker along. And I'm going to soften that a little bit. You can keep your dry marker, so you see I'm going over and over and over. I'm not just doing one stroke. Now, I've got to decide where I want my 30 to begin, and I have to make it taper off as it goes up. And remember, take your 30 right to the edge. Your 3, sorry. And you can do some little individual strokes. Remember, you can try adding a little bit of graphic techniques in as well. And here, putting in our 5. And maybe a little bit of 7 wouldn't hurt here either. Now, this time we didn't put our shadow in, our cast shadow in first. Now, if I don't like the look of that, I can blend it out with my 50, but I blend it toward the right rather than the left because I wanted to go into the shadow, not the light. Okay, now our cast shadow, we've got our 50 first. And see how not outlining with the black has made this look more real. The outlining with the black would have interfered. Okay, I think that was 30, so this is my 50 now. So that's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes with the marker, but hopefully you notice it before you go too far. Now we'll put the 70 in. And the 70 we can put a little bit underneath. I'm going to put a little underneath here and underneath here. That'll help it to pop. Now, I have an unfortunate thing up here, so I'm going to see if I can use my little pen up here to soften some of that out. Sometimes you can render with gray over top of the little white marker. It's safe. If it's dry, you have to let it dry, but it might be safe to do that. We can start with our 5 and our 7. So we'll start right next to the object with our 5. And remember, move your hand up and down, or back and forth, so that it blends. And then we'll use our number 7 to go a little darker. Again, I like to work with the shadow first, because then you know what the darkest dark is, and you know what the lightest light is. It's the white of the paper. So you know how to gauge everything else in between. So we're going to use our 1 and our 3 on the left. Get the paper wet with the lightest one. Now, we have to leave a little bit of space up here where the light is gathering at the edge, the way we did on the box. So we're trying to avoid covering that up too much, but go back and forth and back and forth. This is the 1, yep. Yep, we're in the light now. And we'll put the 3 in the middle of that. And you can let the markers and the paper do a lot of the work. Now we'll switch over to the other side. Now I'm using the 1 again because this is just still in the light, but it's oblique to the light. It's just beginning to turn. That's why I'm using the 1 again over here. And it makes a softer transition for the 3. And I start inside the 1 to put the 3. You don't start at the edge of the 1 because you want to leave some of that showing. And then you can take the 3 all the way out to the edge of your shape. And we'll put in some 5. And the 5 goes inside the 3. So it will look correct if your value is gradual, and by that it means that you have to have the lighter of your colors on the outside and the darker of your colors on the inside. And now we'll put some 7 in, and depending on how much space you have, you can put a broad band of the 7 or a thinner band. And if it looks too much, you use your 5 to blend it over to the shadow side. And then just let it dry, because see, as they dry, they soften a little bit more. Now the top, we want to leave some of the white of the paper, a lot of 1 and a little bit of 3. So I'm trying to leave that gap. I'm starting with my 1. In the Prismacolors, it's percentages. They call it 1%, 10%. In your group, they call it 1. Now I'm looking for my 3 because I want to put a little accent right where it begins. Now there are many, many ways to render the geometric shapes. This is just one of them, but it's meant to show that there's a light side and a shadow side, and it's all because this is side lighting. Okay, and I made a mistake up here with my, I should have brought this down lower so I could clean it up with my white pen if it will cover well enough. But I've also got that white Prismacolor pencil that will help to shade it. And also, if your values are too dark, you can use the white pencil to a minimum, a little minimum of a degree. You don't want to overuse it. Often when you're sketching like this, you can come back in with a straight edge after it's all done and clean everything up with that. This one is truly bothering me. So these are both kind of might help. Bless you. And circles, the ellipses, they look better if you can come from the outside and go in. For your background, to get a little more contrast in, it's a good idea to take your number 7 marker and make it look as if these might be sitting on top of a table, and this is where the table ends. And you just move your marker with the shapes that you've drawn, move it around, and try to pick up that same line on the other side, and fill that in. It gives it a little more punch if you do that. And again, you're moving your hand back and forth. No, I shouldn't have gone all the way down there. I should have stopped up there. And you don't want it to be too busy because it will detract from your shapes. But it is helpful. It does give them a more solid appearance. And that's what we're trying to do here, is make a solid. And you can fix up your shapes too. If you've had a little problem like I had with my ellipse, you can fix it up a little bit. And then this you can clean up after. So, although they're a little daunting, they dry so quickly, there is room if you keep them wet by moving your hand back and forth and back and forth. There's time to fix things up a little bit. So, it's very important though that you see, it's very important after you've outlined your shapes to take them off of your drawing to render them. And then you're going to put them back. So when you outline your box, remember just to leave that in maybe a 30% gray so that you can bring your color up to it but not color over the line, that you get to keep your white line that we worked so hard to have. And then you outline the outer part, but not the inside part, and then just 30%, number 3 gray for your shadow. And there's that little black border around the whole edge. Now this one, no inside parts, and just the cone. And I couldn't fit the whole shadow. That doesn't matter. Crop your shadows. You don't have to have the whole thing. And this cylinder, everybody's going to have to crop their shadow because the shadows were so enormous. And don't forget your border. And some of our spheres had big almighty shadows too, so you can crop them. But this one fit for some reason. And so that's what you'll do. And after you're done, after you've finished rendering everything, you take 2 pieces of double-sided tape and you just mount them in place over your original drawing. So key them up so the corner of this box, all the corners match up with the corners of the box underneath. And I'll just be able to flip it up and I'll be able to see what's underneath it. So that it's all one piece. So we're handing everything in next week. And if you want to put in some of those dark backgrounds, it's helpful. It just sort of sets everything off, sets it up nicely.